That sounds great. Great. So welcome everybody. So glad to have you here with us in the virtual world to learn about audio description today. I am Mare Trevathan. I am part of the startup team of Ideas. And my colleague Jeree Anderson, also of the startup team of Ideas, is the person who was just speaking. Wave, Jeree. Well, you see her name there as well. Uh, but I just want to reiterate, in case you weren't here for the tippy top, that the protocol will be cameras on, mics off until Bonnie calls for them. Feel free to stack questions in the chat, introduce yourself in the chat. I'll be monitoring things there. And we are recording. Um, Let me just tell you a little bit about the wonderful Bonnie Barlow, who is going to be leading us today. Bonnie is the owner of Audio Description Colorado. She has described hundreds of plays and events, such as ballet, opera, game shows, rodeo, and art exhibits. If you get the chance at some point, we'll give you her URL at the end of all this, and you should just go and check out this really super impressive list of all the projects that she's done audio description for. Also writes audio description scripts for feature films, documentaries, streaming services, and TV shows. ABC's Blackish, Modern Family, The Middle, Netflix's Grace and Frankie, among others. Her website is, and again, I'll put this in the chat at the end so that you're not distracted now. Stay with us here. But her website is audioandvideodescribing.weebly.com. And I'll turn it over to Bonnie Barlow.
Well, hi. I think we talked about maybe doing a real quick why you are here sort of for folks. So maybe we can just kind of go around and, spend a moment with each of you saying what your interest is and what brought you here. So I only see about 3 people. So can Mare or Jeree kind of ask folks to jump in?
Sure. Well, let's start with Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind, Rebecca, starting. And folks, if you don't want to turn on camera, feel free to tell us why you're here in the chat, and I can lift those out.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Salamonson. I am an audio describer in Denver for various companies, but I haven't had a whole lot of formal training. So I saw this and I thought that was this would be a really nice opportunity to just, I don't know, I can always learn new vocabulary and new ways just to be better at what I do.
Fill in a few blanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. John, would you mind going next?
Thank you. I'm John Concannon from New York City. At the moment, I am a theatrical stage manager. Now, as a stage manager, I don't do much in the way of describing except to the people that are on headset, but I have to necessarily deal with all of the people involved within a production. Audio describing would come as part of it, and it's something that I think I need to have just to have in my back pocket.
Love it. Thank you, John. Aaron, I see that you added it to chat, but if you would be so kind as to state it for the good of the group. Oh, sorry, Aaron Rollman. Aaron Swank just came on there too. Aaron, you're on. Aaron Rollman.
Okay, hi.
All the errands.
I'm here particularly because we're putting out some longer format video offerings soon from Bumport. I'm here to learn how to deal with audio description for those. So that's it.
Cool.
Fabulous. Thanks, Aaron Rollman. Aaron Swank.
Hello, I am another stage manager. I have had a little bit of experience on being on a show that had audio description and trying to figure out where to set those people up in a different booth so that I'm not heard, but they are to the right people, and what do they need ahead of time. So I'm interested in knowing how I can help as a stage manager.
Right.
Thanks.
Love it. And then from the chat here, Bonnie, here's a bit of a range. Who doesn't love a free education? I love that. Lifelong learners. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Scrolling. Info to pass on to the community. saw a few things in here just scrolling up. Um, Want to help with accessibility for our patrons. Important to learn a new skill as a theater practitioner. Thank you all for contributing. Yeah, I think that's what we've got, Bonnie.
Cool. Good reasons. I like it. So basically, I'm here to kind of help you learn from my years of experience, many of which were all the difficulties I ran into time after time trying to provide the very best description possible in the easiest way possible. So maybe we can kind of cut out some of the having to learn and reinvent the wheel and approach things from a more informed place at this point. It's always worth a try. So I've been doing the audio description since 1992, which was soon after the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And that was here in Denver. And I knew several blind people in the community here, along with other people with other disabilities. There was kind of a couple of groups of people I hung out with. And one was the people who started Family, the theater group. And so people in the community, blind people, specifically said they'd heard about this audio description thing, and they all had gotten tickets to Cats coming up, and they wanted it to be described, and if it wasn't, they were going to stand up in the middle of it and protest. So that kind of lit a fire under a couple of people, which, you know, unfortunately, sometimes it takes that kind of you know, active protesting to make things finally, you know, become unstuck. So that was Very Special Arts Colorado that kind of got that request. And so they found a gentleman named Alan Woods, who was located in Illinois and with the university, and they'd been doing some description. So they asked him what we could do. And so he sent out some materials, like some bits of videos to describe, and we held, you know, we put in audition notices, and people just came, and we were given basic instructions about, you know, just watch this little clip a couple of times, observe what's going on, try then to describe it succinctly, you know, don't be objective, don't, you know, say what you think they're feeling or something, just tell us what's going on. And so we all did that, and I was one of the ones who also auditioned. And there were maybe 12, 15 people who auditioned, and we sent all that good stuff back to him. And he picked about 9 people, and I was one of them. And then he came out for a weekend, the weekend that Cats was going to be showing, and he trained us. We went into one of like DCPA's you know, conference rooms or whatever. And the training is really pretty simple. Once you hear the basics, the training is practicing and getting feedback from the other people in the room. Everyone who's kind of heard the same information, plus hopefully maybe a visually impaired person or two, at least during some part of the session, to give you feedback on whether what you're conveying actually helps them understand what's going on or not. And it's very nerve-wracking at first, and everyone gets scared, and it's, you know, you feel like I have to do it perfectly from the start, which, you know, I'm just going to say right now you won't. So get over that. And then because everyone sees something different and everyone draws their own conclusions, the very most important basic study or principle is to be objective, to not draw conclusions and pass those on. Don't interpret the story. You're interpreting the visuals of the story. Somebody's already told the whole story. So the director, the lighting people, the stage, you know, directors and managers, the actors, everybody's already got the story in place, and your job is to kind of pick it up on it and prioritize at any given moment what does a blind person need to know to understand what's going on, to enjoy what's going on, and to you know, follow the action and stay within the action. So it's very important to keep people in the mode of the piece with that suspension of disbelief. You don't want to take them out by saying things like, it's hard for people who work in the theater sometimes to not use the terminology like, you know, a set flies in, or, you know, you've got the stage left and the stage right. And it's like, we don't really care so much about where they are left, right, back, forward, as much as we care about where they are in relationship to each other. And that's the same for any kind of performance or dance or even singing concerts. It's like, are they close to each other? What are they conveying? You know, what is their expression? Do they turn away? Sometimes what they don't do is as important as what they do. If you're expecting a certain action and it doesn't come through. So instead of saying someone is sad, you know, you have to drill down to, what do I see that makes me think they're sad? They might be, they might not be, but what am I seeing that's bringing an emotion to my attention? And so it might be a lowered eyes, it might be a wiping out a tear on a cheek, and that sort of thing. So it's staying within the mood and the mode of the piece and conveying all of those things. So I was going to play you a little bit of a film that I wrote the description for, but it's so different for theater and film. And when we try to get people, even when training, you know, we have to use sometimes film media and or filmed plays, but there's always that whole camera angle kind of, you know, thing that happens during that kind of a performance that can be distracting. When we're describing a play live, we're seeing it all at once. And so our focus isn't being drawn to that person's close-up or that person's arm or whatever, you know, the others might decide is the most important at the time. Even with Hamilton on Disney Plus, they pull out different things. So you might not see the ensemble behind them dancing and or moving the furniture in the hurricane and how that all takes place. So I don't think I will show you that. I can send you all a list of some of the best things to look at described on Netflix and or Amazon, and kind of give you maybe examples of a couple that aren't as good, because not everything that's described out there is up to par with the, you know, the basic principles. And as theater folk, I think it's important for you to understand, and I will get more into details about how, why, when, where, what in an actual description, but also to understand why it is so important to keep the objectivity and to see other people. Like, I'm sorry, but if anyone here works for Disney, close your ears. They do a very bad job doing description for Disney because they get very subjective. They just really seem to think it's their job to tell you what somebody's feeling or to use a metaphor that's just kind of like really off the wall. So I can usually only listen to Disney description for a couple of minutes and I'm like, oh, turn it off. I can't stand it, you know. So it's and it's just background, and it's kind of part of it is being able to be empathetic as a describer and being able to put yourself in the place of the blind person listening. And the more you hang out with blind people, the better, because you'll know the things that do catch their attention, the things they care about. It'll be different for everyone because there's no one thing, of course. But, you know, get feedback, don't be afraid of it. They're usually nicer than they should be. In many instances, they could give real honest feedback, but, you know, they say, oh, you were great, you know, and it's like, no, really, please tell me, you know, did this work or didn't that? And some of them may say, well, I wanted to know more about the costumes because I used to make clothes, and someone else will be, you know, I want to know more about the dance and that sort of thing. Whereas someone else is like, I have no interest in the dance part. So, another thing is to use, because you may be describing varied things from, you know, Hamilton to Lion King to Alice in Wonderland, or all of the subject matter is so different and the way it's conveyed is different, but you don't have to be familiar with every specialty or every terminology for everything, because if you think about it, your audience isn't going to necessarily know the terms of a ballet any more than you do. So if you're out there saying, you know, she's doing a plie and a grand jeté, and then there's 3 in a row, only if you can describe what a grand jeté is in, you know, fairly detailed terms, and then use it later, then that sort of thing can be helpful. I do use pirouette a lot because always listen for what the audience is responding to as well, because when someone does many pirouettes in a row, that's when, you know, a ballet audience will be like, whoa, you can just sense the excitement, and they'll clap louder for it. So I'd like to tell them, I'll just count it out. at one point. I'll just say, okay, now she's been 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and you just kind of get into the mood of it and describe exactly what they're doing. So when they're done, there's that same kind of culmination of that particular part that everyone gets to participate in. Same thing for an aria where someone's holding a note forever and, maybe doing something physical at the same time. But yeah, and then you want to tell them when a standing ovation happens so they can participate in that. And physical humor is tricky because you don't want a delayed reaction. It's like trying to explain a joke is never funny. So you need to set the joke up ahead of time and let them know, so write yourself a cue where you see something's coming along and somebody's going to trip. Everyone's going to laugh, especially when you've previewed it and you've seen that happen. And then, get yourself saying the setup right at the same time so your audience can laugh too. And it's funny because sometimes they're very responsive and laughing a lot in a rehearsal or a previous performance. And then the night that and then she does it, and the whole audience is just like, yeah, whatever. It's like, never mind. But, you do the best you can. So the basics are say what you see. And no, that's a song. Oh, say, can you see? And there are some resources. There's the descriptive video project through the ACB, and they have a ton of resources on their website. And I think Mare was going to get that posted somewhere here for y'all. Okay, she gave me a thumbs up. So there are some guidelines. There are also Canadian guidelines, which are very similar. Netflix has their own set of guidelines. UK has their own guidelines. But all of them contain that basic say what you see. Don't add to it. Don't overemphasize something if it doesn't need that. Don't insert yourself too much into, this isn't about you being a great, person who can describe with fancy words. This is about you just really fitting in, just like the photography and or the, dance does. You don't really want to draw attention to yourself. If you do, you're not doing something right. So
Hey,
you have
Bonnie,
to, yeah.
I'm sorry for the interruption. Would you like people to have that link or for me to do a screen sharing now, or we also have that information for them at the end? What's
Yeah,
most useful to you?
we can do it at the end, I think.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So I'm going to start from some of the basics. Well, okay, let me read you this. And this isn't to, I was just saying it's not about you, getting kudos, but I was going to give you a kudo that I got once because it really explains what the visually impaired person went through. And so it was the play Hamilton, and I had described it here in Denver. So I had seen it twice, and then they wanted me to come up to Salt Lake City and describe it there at the Eccles Theater. I had done a little bit of description for them before that from this, started basically by this gal named Jennifer Kennedy, who just was so into theater and had, become blind later in life and just really pressed for, let's do description here. She'd experienced other places. So she said, about the whole thing, that the narration was fabulous. Bonnie was clear and easy to understand. The words she used were in the perfect places for description, and she managed to avoid talking over most every note. And that's the thing also, kind of fitting all of this in between and not over, and having to adjust for loudness and, that sort of thing too is another skill that you kind of develop as you go along. And if you get into the rhythm of the show, then you're much more likely. So I just ended up wrapping my description. I didn't worry about full sentences. I didn't worry about the usual conventions that we talk about and articles and, proper, placement of the grammar. It's like, I had to meet the rhythm of the play and just talk about, now he's up on the table and, there's more, and now he jumps down and the lights go blue and then something else happens and then da, da, da. So, you just kind of really get into it. So she said that having the information provided enriched my experience, and I suspect I became even more emotional as a result. To put this into context, imagine you had heard the soundtrack 100 times, went to see the show, and then all the lights went out. You never see the exchange between Hamilton's when she's great with child. You don't know the king is watching during part of the show. You don't see how Burr's facial expressions become more heartless and the monologue Hamilton gives as the bullet moves in slow steps toward him, and that you now see that it's something he says just before he collapses. You still love the show and appreciate the talent of the actors and musicians, and you're swept away because you were in the room where it happened. But those details, you may learn about those exchanges from others who've seen it, but it's not like knowing it in the moment. For an avid theater goer for many years, that feeling of intimacy can't be captured by a recap later. I know because my husband has tried. We've been seeing shows since long before I lost my ability to see these details on stage. And even as my vision loss and light sensitivity increased, it's never stopped my love for live theater. I told my husband after the show it was like I had filled in something that had been missing from my experience. I didn't realize it was even gone to begin with. I found myself even more emotionally invested and so excited I couldn't sleep Sunday night. I kept thinking about the magic I had been swept into for those 3 hours and how this could become an every show feeling. So, yeah, you done okay when when someone gets to, get that emotional charge out of something. So, and she and I are still in contact today. She's moved to Minneapolis even, but so the other basics then are, I highlighted some stuff here. So one of the good places for information you can find through that audio description project is the work by Joel Snyder, Audio Description Guidelines and Best Practices. And he has an ebook that you can get. And so some of the main things, this was a group of definitions and principles that a whole group of people who'd been doing description for a long time came up with. And so the term that's, because there's a lot of different terms that get thrown around, video description, descriptive English description, blah, blah, blah. I believe that the major organizations like the NFB and the FCC and government have come up with, let's use audio description. So when people are going to search for things, they're going to most often find them with those two words attached as keywords or in the title. So audio description is really the best kind of overall thing to apply that'll make things easier to find. So if, say, you create a video of your play and you're putting it on YouTube, and you might have one version for people that's for the sighted, then have another version with a description track, and just make sure you have your same title of your show with audio description in the title. So the people who listen to description are as diverse as can be, and it's not just people with vision loss. And those who do have vision loss, it's all the whole range. It's, a little bit of vision loss to maybe tunnel vision or peripheral vision, or, kind of maybe color, but not other details. So you kind of have to just kind of ride that line between, assume more visual impairment than not when you're deciding what to describe. But do use color. You can be colorful, and people who are blind, even if they've never seen color, but many have because sometimes they lose their vision later, still have associations with certain colors, just like we all do. Blue is cool, red is hot. So when the lights go a certain color or not, and all the women in West Side Story are wearing red dresses when they're doing that dance on the roof after the party or whatever. So don't worry about using color. Just don't get too involved and expect them to know what you mean when you're talking about fuchsia. but your basics, go ahead and throw that in there when it's part of the thing. Audio descriptions and assistive technology, it's meant to enhance and not replace the user's own powers of observation. So again, you're not providing description to show off your vocabulary or highlight your beautiful voice. You work for the production and the audience. A certain self-effacement is required, and background in the medium of the genre can be helpful, but you won't always have that. So whatever life experiences you've had up to this point will serve you well in how you choose to do description. That's one thing that's really nice about it too, is you get to highlight the things that you're best at or most interested in, and that's okay. If you want to do a little extra description around costumes because you really like that. If you have time, go and do it. It's great. And then a consultant is a person who's blind or visually impaired, and they have experienced audio description. They've listened to it, and they know good from bad description. So you always want to ask them, to give you details, feedback. Sometimes nowadays it's easier, like send out a survey through MailChimp or something to a mail list. You can get more involvement. Most blind people have email that they can read. When you send them information, remember that voice reading software doesn't read images, it only reads text and words, although they're getting more sophisticated all the time. So don't include a lot of, pictures or anything. Kind of strip it down to HTML or basic Word format to just give them the information. And they can kind of, so like if you send out a schedule. So the core skills. So the very first thing, if you're sitting in a chair in a theater and a show is about to start and you can't see, what are you going to want to know? Where is this taking place in space? Obviously, it's going to be in front of you somewhere, but is it like a big space? Is it a small stage? Is it up higher? Is it down lower? Where's your direction going to be pulled? So in space, you want to talk about, so before a show starts, you want to kind of set up the first scene. Take advantage of all the different times when you do have a little extra time to have some notes and between scenes, set it up and don't wait for the action to start, because this gives you a little more time to kind of work with. And so instead of them just kind of being left with, oh, I guess they're just all hanging out in space, say, okay, it's a living room, and then describe in an orderly way. So go like from left to right, go clockwise, and go ahead and use the 6, 12, 3, and 9 o'clock positions if you want to, and describe, kind of going from the front to the back, and then across the back, and then forward again to the edge, and then anything that's kind of around the stage, scaffoldings that they might have included. Any of the kind of conventions that are specific to that play, mention them ahead of time so you don't have to, again, take the time during. So like with Les Mis and Hamilton, a lot of the shows, they use a turntable usually. And like with Hamilton, they had 2 turntables that sometimes moved together, sometimes in opposite directions from each other. So those, I would say ahead of time, those denote kind of either changes in relationships in space or time. And so like Hamilton might just be standing in the center, and the woman he had an affair with moves off, but then Eliza is just kind of glides in next to him next, so it's all kind of a real smooth transition. So any kind of special things they have like that, you can describe ahead of time. When you describe people, you don't want to give away who the characters are until they're named in the play. Just kind of keep thinking about, what does the sighted audience know at this point, and what do I, need to then share or keep quiet about. So at first you'll use more physical descriptions, or and then kind of try to identify if voices sound alike. Throughout the play, there'll be more times you're going to want to say, oh, that's Bob again, or whatever, or just mention their names as they start something or finish, just to kind of give an extra hint that, those are the 2 characters communing. Ethnicity and race is always a tricky one, because we tend to describe non-white, but we don't give the equal, thing to white. We assume white and then describe everything else, which is not equitable. So, a lot of people use dark skinned. I hate dark skinned. I don't like using that one. But they'll say, well, you don't want to say black because, maybe they're not, they want to call themselves African American, but not every black person is from Africa. There may be Aboriginal, people, or Jamaican Americans. And so it's a personal choice, and I'm certainly not going to say what anyone should do. I'd say if you have friends who fit in that group, ask them what they prefer. even if they're not a visually impaired person, say, you know, if someone's referring to you and something like that, do you like to be called black? Do you like to be called, you know, nothing? I mean, it's tricky, but most of the people I've known have said, you know, let's just keep it simple and say black, you know, but
And that's
again,
something, Bonnie, that we can talk about with this group at the end. It's something that Ideas cares about very much, racial equity. So we'll dig into
yeah,
that conversation. I'm glad that you brought that up.
yeah, and it's an ongoing one, you know, and again, get feedback and try to be as sensitive as possible and listen and, you know, respond to what people want because they know better than I do. You know, it's just a fact. So cool. Always go from the general to the specific. When you start out, you're going to see everything happening all at once, and you're going to say, "There's no way I can describe all of this, so I give up." You know, it's just too much. But you just have to prioritize and see as the piece goes on and you become familiar with it, what was most important in that scene, and make yourself a note saying, "Ah, it was the fact that Bob, you know, had entered the room and Susie didn't know it yet," or whatever it was. And then you can go back and kind of say, okay, I'm going to point that out as it happens in an unobtrusive way. But you don't want to work from too many notes because then they take your attention away from the screen, or not the screen. I was looking at the screen. Hey, that's the screen from the stage. So, and the very first time I did a show, I had tons of pages of notes, and I dropped them all right as the show started. So that was no help whatsoever. Use a stapler if you're going to use notes. So for pre-show stuff, do notes. But for during the show, you know, sometimes if something's going to be going on that's got a lot of similar movements, but I don't want to say the same thing each time. For instance, in The Miracle Worker, the scene where Annie is teaching Helen to eat with a spoon, or knife and fork, and they're fighting over it. All of the physical fight that goes on has a lot of the same things. You know, she bolts from her chair, she snatches her back, she, you know, dumps her on the chair, and then, you know, she runs to the other side. And so I actually made up a whole list of words that I could just look at while that scene was going on and just kind of pick which words I wanted to use at any given moment, rather than, you know, try to plan it all out ahead of time and or draw a blank when it came to, you know, actually being in that scene. So, and yet many times in describing, you want to be consistent in a term because it's less confusing. So again, there's that kind of delicate line to walk between when do I say it many different ways and when do I say it in just one easily understood, you know, quick reference. So you always want to give them kind of a visual perspective of where this is all taking place. And it's the same in films and TV and streaming too. It's like if you start listening to descriptions, you'll hear them say in the bedroom. And then the next thing is what is going on, not even who's there, but what is happening, because that's the next thing we'll notice first. So it's like, you know, 3 people are playing cards. And then if you have time, you know, Bob and Joe slap their cards down. So you get to add some people. And then you can maybe add some details. So you always want to set that scene and not just kind of leave them out there dangling because it helps cement everything else into a context that's much easier to follow if they know where it's taking place. Sometimes a scene change, they're all so quick nowadays, but sometimes you can tell by the audio change and everything, and it always happens in a certain order, so you don't necessarily have to point it out each time. But when it is important to know, okay, now they're not in the living room talking with the kids, now they're in the bedroom afterward, you know, fighting about it or whatever. So where they're at, what they're doing, and then any kind of fun extra additional things. But you don't have to fill up every minute with talking either. In fact, you don't want to do that. You need to kind of pull back sometimes, and when you could share something, you know, just kind of because it can be exhausting. I also suggest that you listen to some description, you know, and in kind of a busy environment if you can, and just kind of expose yourself to that experience, because it's an active kind of thing that the audience member is doing. It's like trying to listen to 2 songs, you know, in a room at the same time from the radio and the TV, and you know, you just go nuts after a while. So again, you just kind of want to keep it manageable for everybody. Not sure. So you got who, what, when, where, why, how. Yeah, how. Directional information. It's a little different for a large theater where you have everybody mic'd and coming out of speakers kind of, as groups, versus in a smaller theater where your person in the audience is going to be able to tell, oh, those two guys are over there to the left, so they're together. So if it is kind of important that they're in a specific place or they're watching a specific action taking place, then you do want to mention where they are. But at first, I think for me and for the other describers, it was like just such a temptation to always say, on the left, he does this, on the right, he does that. And it's like, we don't care. It's like, where are they? That's important. So the see what you say, you don't have to describe things that are audible, but it sometimes, when you're beginning, it's like, oh, the phone rang, and it's like, yep, we know that. Sometimes you want to say that a voice is coming from off stage, so they'll know, like say a ghost in Hamlet or something starts to speak before they enter, but you don't want to say off stage, so you can just say a disembodied voice or something like that to let them know it's not a person right in front of everybody at that moment. So you can't convey every visual image on display. It's not a running commentary unless you're in an opera, a ballet, or a rodeo. No, not really. But it's the same thing for, say, a ballet. Again, it's about the relationships between people. And it's, if you can look up ballet terms and you can look up how they're described in certain, knowledgeable resources, and then kind of use those same ways to describe them. It's hard to find dance described. Everybody just wants to show it. So you'll go to YouTube and you'll see them doing it, but nobody's saying, the tap dance moves of a shuffle or whatever, but they're very aptly named. They always kind of, the name fits the kind of dance move that they're doing. So dance is challenging, but just to kind of bring it in when you can. Let's see. So use everyday terms. Everything should be done in the present tense, an active voice, instead of saying, and don't, it's kind of a fine line between using full sentences and just being choppy. So both will drive me crazy. So you can kind of shortcut on some of the sentences, but still say it in a way that feels conversational. Say it in a way that if you were sitting next to a blind friend and you were talking into their ear as it's going on, you're not going to say, man picks up book, man drops book, and you're not going to say, oh, the eloquently dressed man with the long tail of his, and he picks up the book, it goes on. You're going to say, oh, Joe just picked up the book. So kind of keep it conversational and natural. You can say we see or whatever. Sometimes you can say, you don't want to break the fourth wall unless they do. And then it's always a choice on how do you say, okay, now they're addressing us. Now they're looking at the audience, or they're looking straight out over the audience or something like that. You'll find the best way to convey that as it's happening. Always use the indefinite article instead of the, if we haven't already identified a certain object as being the sword, like the sword in the stone. Before that, if it's just a sword, then we'll talk about it that way. So there's kind of a progression of how to identify objects. When it comes to adverbs, and you kind of want to avoid words that end in ly and ing, because they usually have a judging kind of word, suspiciously, furiously, but if you can see something that's kind of got an action that goes with it, hurriedly or quickly, that's okay. But it's kind of a fine line there between, choosing wording that ascribes a certain feeling to it rather than just describing it. So try to use those sparingly. Words with Lee. Okay, let's see. metaphors. You can describe shapes and sizes and kind of compare them to other things, but only if you think probably a visually impaired person has been able to experience that up close and personally. If you say that looks like a mountain range of such and such, it's like they probably never really gotten to see a whole mountain range. Or in certain perspective, it's hard to describe perspective. It's like, I don't understand how when you guys say you can only see part of a car because it's at a different angle, and so it's it has to be something they can relate to. So you can give dimensions or compare them and say it's like a 10-story high building, because we all know a story is about 10 feet, or you can say 100 feet. So if your math is as bad as mine is, got to be careful. It's like, wow, really? They went 1,000 feet up? Labels, censorship, you can't censor. You got to describe it if it's there. I can't tell you how many times I've talked about thrusting pelvises or hip bumps. So you want to pronunciate and enunciate and use good breath control and volume. If you're like me, you'll have a terrible headache after you describe the first few plays that you describe. It just, it can feel overwhelming, but just remember that you're giving them more than they have without you. And they are grateful. Nobody's going to walk up to you and say, wow, you're just the worst describer ever, go away. They always appreciate the effort, unless they just keep the rest of that to themselves, and they can do that. Keep your vocal delivery in line with the nature of the material being described, excited versus, hushed or whatever, or mysterious. And, try to use your voice in that way. Nothing less exciting than, listening to a play about exciting things and someone's just talking like this. It's not about providing the information, it's about providing the experience. And it's true in every kind of thing like that. For description, it's not enough to just provide the information. That's the bare minimum. What you want to do is provide that whole experience and really value, the experience that your audience has. Them's the basics. So
Beautiful. Thanks, Bonnie. I think that's awesome timing that with our remaining 12 minutes,
yeah,
we can
I'm seeing that.
open the floor to some questions. Definitely want to come back to the issue of identifying race on stage. And one thing that I'd just like to offer up is that by identifying characters who are white as white, that we can help to push back a bit on white being the default.
Right.
And I wonder if there's an opportunity. It sounds like you very frequently are in rehearsals or seeing a performance at least in advance. Do you ever have the opportunity to speak with the actors or some of the creative team to ask the question about how people want to identify or how characters would, be identified in terms of race?
Hardly ever. Unfortunately, I would always love to, especially talk to choreographers about, what terms they use when they're training their dancers, but they never, again, they rely so much on the visual that they don't, they have the vocabulary they use, but they don't think to include that. So you have to figure you're on your own as far as figuring that stuff out, unless it is something that is really specifically geared that way, and it's a story about, racial relations and that sort of thing. And then you definitely want to, get delve down into that. But it's just always going to be tricky because things like that change, and so visually impaired versus sight impaired versus partially sighted, the blind people that I know all know they're blind and they're okay with that word. So I just finally decided to just go with the simplest one. I haven't had anyone tell me, don't call me blind. It's like, so, okay, good. But I also neglected to talk just a little bit about the physical needs of the theater. So maybe some of you have that question, as someone had brought up first. So just real quick, over the years, the way it's been delivered is, yes, the describer needs to be in a separate booth if they're in the theater. They need to come and preview it at least once. They need to not have a lot of other noise happening in the booth that bleeds over into the earphone of the blind person listening to you. But many of the difficulties also had to do with the electronics and the equipment being unreliable, or, you know, batteries weren't charged, or signals would cross with the equipment a theater was using, especially if they had also a Williams Sound personal PA type system going. Then we had to, you know, try to change all of the settings for the frequencies, and it's just a mess. What I have been finding recently is, and it came kind of just prior to this whole, you know, isolation and virtual situation we ended up in, was I was starting to use my computer and a Zoom meeting and smartphones for the audience members. And so the blind people would know ahead of time when they got their tickets to bring their phone, to have it charged up, to have their headphones, and then I would send them an invite to my meeting wherever I was. So like if I'm in a room up close by and I can see, you know, what's going on stage, then I would dial them all in, get them all just like we're here, and do my description that way. So they could hear me in one ear and the show in the house. And that has worked better than any of the other equipment through all the years. Not only, you know, that personal portable stuff, but even the theaters, the Ellie Calkins and the Buell and Betcher, they all have built-in systems. But if a person isn't sitting in exactly the right place to get the signal from the beam, or, you know, they're under an overhang, there are so many variables, and they end up with static, and maybe something's not charged. And in a theater like that, it's hard for them to get any attention until intermission. And so they end up missing the thing. So the thing I have found most reliable is smartphones. And blind people are very familiar with them now, with all the different apps and how to navigate and get into things. And they can teach me things about it. And so they use voiceover, and basically they just tap on something and hear what it is. And then if they want to open it, they tap twice. If not, they just tap again and go to the next item. So when they get to the item they want, they tap twice and then they're in. So it's just a little bit different way of handling the same thing that we always have. So have maybe some extra phones ready. So this can work. I can describe a play for you remotely. I can be here. And if there's someone in your theater with FaceTime or something showing me the play live, and I've got the other people in a Zoom meeting, I'm describing for them, it works even better than me being there in person, so long as I can see and hear what I need to see and hear. And so I've described a film premiere for a person in Albuquerque, and conferences for people all over the country, where we just do that. We have that kind of flow, and it just works better. So
That's awesome, and great news for the budgets of
yes.
nonprofit theaters. I love it.
Yep.
We have a few questions that I want to get to. Erin Rollman, did you turn on your camera in order to ask a question?
Yep, she's there.
Sure, I'll ask a question. Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually, I know that this is more focused on theater. And mine is a video question, because we are all working a lot in video these days. So we're getting ready to edit together a filmed version of a show.
Okay.
And when I was doing research a few weeks back on audio description, my research was showing try as much as possible to not talk on top of dialogue. But in this show, the lead character talks just constantly. And I was wondering how to negotiate around that.
Well, in a show like that, it's not going to work to do extended description, but I'll tell you all what that is for when it will work. If you're describing something that it won't interrupt the flow, you can sometimes have a pause in the video and have some extra description. But that doesn't work for your situation there. Sometimes you can kind of mix the audio slightly differently and choose a few of the words that are not the most important ones that they're speaking, and bring up the volume on the audio describer, so you can kind of change that focus for that moment. And that's done a lot in description that's online and in movies and stuff. We just don't realize it because they've kind of finessed it to where that works. that's probably about the, unless you can make him speak more slowly.
Well, that's very useful. I was wondering, because we have control of the edit, we wrote the show, we're editing it together. Is it okay to kind of release a slightly different edit with audio description where
Sure.
I create some space every once in a while?
Oh, I would come worship at your feet. Yes.
Oh, okay.
You can do that.
Okay,
Please
that's
do.
great to know. Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Bonnie. We have a question from the chat here. What is your normal physical and equipment setup, and what do you need from a company in advance, Bonnie?
Sometimes, okay, first part, normal physical setup. So like in a bigger theater like the DCPA and the Buell, there's a sound and light booth. And they have me all dialed in with the, same system they use for assisted hearing, but a different channel for the audio description. And then it's a matter of communicating with the house personnel on telling the visually impaired people which channel to choose, and kind of the whole communication thing. There are many times that ushers who've worked for a theater for years are still not really aware of that they had audio description available. So sometimes there's just so much turnover. So as far as the physical setup, I'm kind of getting off base. What was the question?
Well, let's move to the part two part, which probably is relevant to more of the folks on our Zoom today, and that is, what do you need from the company in advance?
Right. A script is always nice if you can. I don't, follow it a whole lot, but if there's some information in it about what the characters are referred to, like a program is always really helpful if it has, because when you're first seeing a play, you see, okay, there's a bunch of people all milling. Okay, those are villagers. Oh, wait, now those are guards. No, wait, now those are the people from Oz. So now we're in the Emerald City. But if you have that list of people playing those characters in a show ahead of time, it's like, oh, good, I've got villagers, I've got soldiers, I've got this or that. So it gives you a nice way to kind of refer to them already. So the more information you can get about who's in the play and kind of the basics of what's happening. So a script can be helpful for that, or if you had a working script or any kind of side info readily available about the costuming or any kind of special things that you had. Another thing that works almost every single time is a sensory tour. So to plan a sensory tour ahead of time and bring people through maybe an hour before the show starts, and then you'll have a break, and people can get the stage set up and all that they need to do. Because if they can come in and feel the props and talk to the folks a little bit about the story and feel their way around the set, that gives the describer much less to do, and it really enhances their experience. That's the way we get people coming to the ballet. We always do that now. We always have a sensory tour, and they're not hard to do, and I could help consult on it, but it's just kind of fun, and it's a interactive thing, and they'll bring more people with them. Usually a visually impaired person will have at least one friend or family member who's also coming, so they all get to access that too. So that's my biggest recommendation on what you can do to help.
That we're adding to the to-do list for ideas now, offering information on how to do a sensory tour. Great idea. Another question from the chat. What's the most unusual situation that you've had to describe?
Well, acrobatics is pretty tricky. I did a group that was like Cirque du Soleil. So it was all hoops and jumping up and down on seesaws and trampolines and sliding down those poles and jumping between them. And I was exhausted by the end of the show. It's like, oh my God. Because, people would react as they're doing that thing where they plunge toward the stage and then stop, inches short. But in other ways, it was kind of easy because there was no, dialogue. So you just had to kind of fit with the rhythm. Ballet is always tricky, but again, you have lots of time, and it's hard to kind of know when to not keep describing, to just let it be. So again, you kind of take your cue from the most famous arias or the most famous, pas de deux or whatever within a piece, and kind of just set the scene and then sit back and let the music, kind of flow, and so you kind of just make that decision as you go. So the most unusual, yeah, I mean, or films that are like almost porn because they're like a teenage boy's flick, about a coming of age story and a sex robot that they, pilfer from. It's like, oh my gosh.
Good thing the
So
color of your cheeks isn't exposed at that point.
yes, I know. So yeah, it can get pretty unusual.
Just a brief caesura here to say that a couple folks are having to jump off. We are at time. Please go with our blessing. Bonnie, if you don't mind, we do have one more question from the
Mhm.
chat. Would you mind staying on to answer
Oh
that?
no, no.
And then we'll wrap it up. And we will make this recording available to you folks. So you'll be able to review all of Bonnie's great advice and anything that you've had to miss if you're jumping off now. But
And and I had offered to, talk with each person who's interested in, kind of just consulting with you about your personal setup and what you might, want to know going forward, or how I could help you, or
Yes, so
amazing
just a
offer.
reminder that we will send an email to follow up, and Bonnie will be CC'd. You all will be BCC'd, but Bonnie will be CC'd. So if you would like to reply directly to Bonnie, you may do so.
Great. Thank you for that generous offer, Bonnie.
sure.
Okay, the last question here. Do you have any familiarity with audio description practices in immersive and other non-proscenium events? Our work often involves multiple simultaneous scenes that groups of audience experience in differing orders.
Yes, actually a little bit. I was going to be involved with Meow Wolf as they're starting to build up here in Denver. And so I was with the accessibility group. I wasn't officially on it, but I was going to the meetings and even went down to Santa Fe and went through with a blind person through the House of Eternal Return, and was describing things to her and researching the kind of tech that there's a lot of stuff now for blind folks where you can get, again, it's off of a phone, and you can get some software and you can get a little bit of hardware to go with it, where you can put sensors up in an exhibit, and then they can listen and not only hear the information about what's right there, but also where to go next, or given choices, and it will tell them where the bathrooms are and where the exit is and where the food court is, and just all kinds of things that are being developed that each is providing more and more autonomy. And I was really hoping to put all of that in, help put that in place with the new Meow Wolf starting from the beginning, because it's like, it's so much easier to do it from the start than to wait. But then, kind of things were taking longer, of course, and then the whole COVID thing. So I think that if people have an immersive thing like that right now, most of them are doing it virtually. And or if you guys are doing plays virtually or streaming something, I can also help you with that. I can describe, again, from here, if I have access to your show and can preview it, the description. I actually on my own did a description of Hamilton on Disney Plus for about 20 visually impaired people, and they all just tuned in, and I just played it on my computer and did it from there. So there's all kinds of different ways to approach it and make it happen, and especially immersive kinds of art, because that's obviously where things are really heading. People want to be in the middle of the experience, and once we're able to touch things again, that'll help. But yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities with that.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. I love that that you could say, yes, I do have experience with immersive. That's
Yes.
awesome. Awesome. Of course you do.
Oh, and also Family did a thing where they had 7 short plays that they did, and they were doing them in a art gallery. So people were moving from room to room. So a describer in the gallery would only be stuck in one place and wouldn't, be able to go with them to every play. But I did the Zoom meeting, and the visually impaired person who was there was listening to me on her phone. Didn't quite work, but the guy who was the stage manager gave her his phone, and we got connected. And a nice thing about using the whole iPhone version is more communication back and forth with chat and phone calls separate from the Zoom meeting that can really keep you connected with the audience and the describer. So that worked really well because she could just go up, you know, to the next one, and the person who was showing me the show, so they could go anywhere and I could describe it.
I love it. I love the way that you're talking about harnessing technology that most of us already have too.
Yep. Yep.
Bonnie, Barlow, thank you so much for spending today with
Absolutely.
us. Thank you to all the folks who joined us today via Zoom. And yes, so we've said it in the chat to be clear, we will be making this recording available to you. You're getting just a ton of thank yous in the chat, Bonnie.
You're
Hopefully
welcome.
you see here Bonnie's website. Jury is sharing her screen. And Rebecca, you know what, Rebecca, you said how to pronounce your name at the top, and now I don't remember if it was Solomonson, but you see how it's spelled.
Salamonson. Yeah,
Salamonson.
Salamonson.
Salamonson. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Rebecca, as you may have heard it if you were here at the very top, also does audio description. So there's Rebecca's website as well. You're welcome. And acb.org/ADP is that audio
Yep.
description project that Bonnie was talking about earlier. Tons of information there. Friends, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be following up, at least within the next couple of days, with information from Bonnie and ways in order to reach her. Thank you, Bonnie.
You bet.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Take care.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.